In 2006, we lost Ronnie Sox of the famous Sox and Martin racing team. It was a shock to the Mopar world, and we all realized at that moment that we were not going to have our heroes around forever. Soon wrote an editorial in Mopar Collector's Guide referencing how we needed to do a Hall of Fame for the Mopar heroes that we grew up with, to preserve Mopar history for the future generations. As the years went by, I ran into a good friend of mine, Jim Kramer, at a show, and he asked me when I was going to do a Mopar Hall of Fame. I must have looked at him with a yeah right look in my eyes. He proceeded to say, "If you don't do it, no one else will." In my heart of hearts, I knew he was right, so in 2011 I began lining up sponsors and critical people to help me pull something together that the entire Mopar community could be proud of. What we ended up with was a number of Hall of Fame induction dinners that were held Saturday night of each Chrysler's at Carlisle event from 2012 until 2018. The Mopar Hall of Fame will go forward each preceding year in the pages of Mopar Collector's Guide magazine. This is one of those recordings made on one of those incredible nights at the Mopar Hall of Fame at Chrysler's at Carlisle. We're going to begin our program tonight with something that's very unique to Mopars, and it was a road show that was put together to promote the new Chryslers in 1970. And this has never been done, I think, before, and probably never been done since. And the two gentlemen that put it together, the Plymouth Rapid Transit System Caravan, are here tonight, Bob Larivee and Bill Moeller. Would you please come up to the stage? Bob is also a SEMA Hall of Fame inducted, and he's been in the show business for about 51 years. So we're going to roll some slides behind them as they speak, and we had so many they provided us that take a definite look at these slides. Many of them have never been seen before behind the scenes of the rapid transit system back in the day. So listen to them and watch the slides behind them.
Well, 51 years, that just means I'm getting old, I guess. But let me start in the beginning. I produced my first successful car show in Toronto in 1960. And how did I get ready for that event? I was born on the east side of Detroit, close enough to Motor City Speedway that on weekday nights we could hear the midgets running, and that probably began it all for me. And in the early 50s, I joined a club, MMAC, Motor City Modified Automobile Club, which was very significant because that club was one of the founding members of the Michigan Hot Rod Association, which was formed in 1952, and that's usually referred to as MHRA. And so the reason that MHRA was formed, because like everybody in America, we in Detroit wanted to have a legal place for drag racing, and there was none. So all these clubs got together. There were probably 50 of them at the meeting, and they decided that they were going to build a drag strip. The only problem is, of course, they had no money. So they decided to start a car show, and with whatever money they could make at the car show, they'd build a drag strip. Well, they succeeded with the drag strip. They ran it for 10 years, and that car show is 67 years old, and it's called the Detroit Autorama. And so it shows that things can happen when you want them to. But back to what I was talking about Motor City, I also began circle track racing at that very track in the early 50s, so I had a very busy life with my club activity, being involved with MHRA, with Autorama, and I was already married and had 4 kids by the time I was 25, so I was a busy guy. But at any rate, in the mid-50s, MHRA came up with the idea that they wanted to make the show more successful. Hopefully, if they could broaden the scope of the show and draw families, they could make more money. And at that time, we were running at the Michigan State Fairgrounds. So they decided what they'd do is bring in a top-rated publicity man, promoter from Detroit, and see what he could do with it. And his name was Don Riddler. And he had the idea that by bringing in musical entertainment, the wives would want to come with the guys to this car show and thereby help make it a family event. That was our whole goal, to make it a family event. And he brought in guys like, if you're old enough to remember, the Big Bopper, Little Anthony and the Imperials, and whoever was around at that time in the mid-50s. The show grew and grew, and And so eventually, that was how I got into the thing of wanting to do my own shows. I got to know Don very well, and he saw that I was really interested in the car show, more than just coming down there once a year and working on it. And he encouraged me to start my own shows. And so that was how I happened to go up to Toronto and start that show in 1960. I want to give you just a little bit of information on that show because it was so unique. And I often say we succeeded because of our ignorance, and this was really the case in Toronto. First of all, when I went up there, Sunday was the Lord's Day, so nothing could be open on Sunday. No movie theaters, nothing, no entertainment, no businesses. And so we couldn't run on Sunday. Okay, we'll run Friday night and Saturday. Well, we thought maybe we could make it because obviously we had a lot of expense. We were running at the Canadian National Exhibition Fairgrounds. I found out that Toronto was dominated by one radio station, Chum Radio, CHUM AM. And so I went over to Chum, met the station manager, who became a lifelong friend of mine, and I was aware that they had a small trailer that they used for remotes. I convinced him to bring that trailer to Speed Sport, and that was the name of the Toronto show that we had decided on. And lo and behold, we drew 14,000 people to that event. We charged $1.25 and $1.25 for kids, and we grossed $18,000. Now, none of that sounds very successful by today's standards, but we made $10,000 profit. That was as much as I made in a whole year painting signs with my dad. So before that year ended, 1960, I ran 8 more shows, and we were on our way. Just to give you an idea of how we did increase our business and how we proceeded to produce shows all over. We ran shows in the United States, Canada, England, Alaska, and Hawaii, and within 20 years, we were running about 100 shows a year. And people often say, how did I go to all those cities? Well, I didn't. We were running as many as 7 shows on a weekend, and these were all in the winter, so we would start in September and finish in April. At any rate, when we first started running these shows, a pretty famous, well, he wasn't famous then, but he became famous. A guy from California had built a real famous car, the Outlaw. Ed Roth was his name. And he came back east with that car. And I got to know Ed real well, and I started advertising him in some of the shows, and eventually added George Barris and a couple of other builders. And eventually, I really fell in love with the Outlaw, so I bought the Outlaw, and eventually the Beatnik Bandit and the Mysterian, all from Ed Roth. And of course, in the meantime, we were having other customizers starting to build cars for us because we thought the cars were important for our attendants. And then around the mid-60s, we thought about what we could do to, again, sort of diversify Autorama. And we thought maybe we could bring in more celebrities like the kind that we had with Ed Roth and George Barris. So we thought that maybe we could afford Playboy Playmates. So I know that sounds funny, but we went to Playboy, and we were informed by Playboy that we could not book Playmates without having an advertiser for a sponsor. And that was a stumbling block. We didn't know if we really had anybody that advertised in Playboy magazine. But we did know somebody, and that somebody was Chrysler Corporation. And so Chrysler agreed to sponsor us, and we were able to book Playmates. And the ending of that story is that for the next 20 years, we were the largest booker of Playmates in the country. And in many of our shows, we were booking 6, 8, or even 12 Playmates at a show. And we did that for 20 years. It was a really exciting time. We were trying to add all kinds of innovations to the shows. And so we decided that what we would like to do is have a souvenir program that we could sell in our shows. We were, within about 4 years, we were running about 50 shows a year. And so we thought what we would do is go to California and see if we could convince some of the hot rod manufacturers, we'd never been out there, to advertise in our program. So we went to California, and we were amazed at how well we were received. And we got to meet all of our hot rod heroes, guys like Vic Edelbrock, Roy Richter, who owned Bell Auto Parts, and Krager, and just so many people. And eventually we got to know just about all of the manufacturers, all of the customizers who eventually worked with us insofar as building cars for us and leasing cars. And that was the beginning of the whole thing. That program eventually became very successful. It was called the Hot Rod Show World Annual. If any of you went to a World of Wheels show, you may have bought one. And our circulation rose to where we were selling over 300,000 copies a year. So life was really good. And because of all of this involvement, and the thing with Playboy and all that, we built a good relationship with Chrysler. And they were also, of course, exhibiting at Detroit. And so in the late 60s, they decided that they wanted to put a package on the road that would go to dealers, and they wanted to customize the cars. They wanted some of the builders, and we had the expertise to do that. They came to us and asked us if we could help get some designers to work on the cars, and you're going to be seeing pictures of all these cars that were part of RTS, and get them built by famous builders so that they would attract people. And so we were very pleased, obviously, to work with Chrysler, and said we would be more than happy to put that package together with them. So at this point, I'm going to turn this over to the guy that really made it happen, who worked with Chrysler every step of the way, my friend Bill Moeller, and he's going to tell you the rest of the story. Thank you.
Boy, I got to say, it's a true honor to be here. I'm sorry. Okay, a little taller. It's truly an honor to look out at so many car enthusiasts. I realize that a lot of the background of this Hall of Fame has been with racing and drag racing, and yet there's another side to this, and the indoor car shows is that. I'm going to modify some of the things that I was going to say. Bottom line is that I was born in Chicago, grew up in Washington, D.C., Bethesda and Chevy Chase, Maryland, joined a club called the Ramrods, and we were a drag race club as well. One of our members went to a show in Toronto, the one that Bob was speaking about, and we asked if he was interested in helping us bring our show to the National Guard Army. We had been doing indoor shows in dealerships where the dealerships would empty their showrooms and their shops. We would put 200 cars. We originally started with one show and ended up with 2 dealerships. I'll try to bring this as quickly and yet slowly. I ended up buying a Roadster from Neil East from the cover of Rod and Custom magazine, the first issue that went full size, drove it across country, stopped in Indianapolis, and showed in Bob's second international championship before ISCA and finished in the 5th place tie. Our club ran the first show on Mother's Day weekend. Nobody in motorsports runs on Mother's Day weekend. We drew 11,000 people in 1961. We got back to our regular dates in 1962 and drew 22,000 people. I guess I was the right guy in the right place at the right time. Bob hired me in 1962 to run the show car division, and I hauled the Beatnik Bandit and the Outlaw and Bill Cushenberry's El Matador. In fact, ended up putting an oil pan on that after they punctured a hole in it, loading it or unloading it somewhere along the line. Put the oil pan on it. You can imagine this. I thought, boy, we'll be able to drive that car in and out. It smoked so bad when we fired it up, we never fired it again, even though he'd replaced the oil pan. Anyway, Bob and I formed the International Show Car Association in 1963, and I managed and edited the newsletter. I sold the advertising in the Hot Rod Show World. We worked with, as Bob said, we worked with a lot of companies in the industry. We formed a display division and toured exhibits for Krager Champion and Sparkplug and Keystone Wheel. You saw some of the Keystone, the Champion Sparkplug display cars there. The biggest move was, of course, the Rapid Transit Caravan, but a couple things that led up to that. Gene Baker designed, and Ron Gerstner in Buffalo created 2 display vans for Stuart Warner. This was before wireless. So we had a cable that ran from the van. They had monitors, and they could show the races going on the track, along with their ads and the flip-down sides. And that's one of the vehicles that we built two of those for Stuart Warner. We also built, Gene Baker designed the Roadrunner Probe, and Chuck Miller built that car. George P. Johnson created a display. It sat, those of you who might have seen it at a car show, it sat on a raised platform. It would sit there and it would sound the beep beep sound. It had a jack underneath, it had lights underneath, and it would go through the gears, and the lights would be faster, and then they would slow down and go, oh, and stop, and it would sit there until the next time it cycled through. And that was a pretty exciting display. We were excited to be part of building the Roadrunner Pro. In fact, I looked in our history, and a guy by the name of Gordon Sherry worked with us to make sure that the styling changes we made on the Roadrunner Probe were not going to be out of style when the next rendition came apart. And I discovered that Gordon Sherry was the one who came up with the Roadrunner name. And I think those of you that work with Chrysler probably know that background, but I never did. I drove Roadrunner Probe down to Goodyear Tire, where we were working with Dave Harrison. He introduced me to Bill Newkirk in the PR department, then Frank Lane in the head of advertising, and they also worked with us in Chrysler on the Playboy Playmates. But we also did a bunch of projects for Goodyear Tire, the colored bicycle tires, and we had the 3 top cars on the front row riding on Goodyear tricycle dragsters with colored bicycle tires. Bottom line is, the RTS Caravan originated from a meeting that I had with Dick Cook, the display and exhibit manager of Chrysler on Jefferson Avenue, where I'm sure Herb spent some time over there. Joe Schulte was with J.R. Thompson, and they told us that the marketing program had already been approved, but we could not discuss it because the new cars had not come out yet. So I took the concept back to Bob. Bob approved it, and we wrote the proposal for Chrysler Plymouth. In fact, back in the day, we didn't have the computers, and my secretary typed about 8 copies with carbon paper and the old tissue paper that you put between, so you run 8 copies through an electric typewriter. Took it back with Bob's approval, and we got Chrysler's approval. We hired John Noga to be the advance man, and the GTX that you see here appeared at one show when we debuted the RTS in the New York Coliseum. We were fortunate to have Mario Saccone here, who was our road manager throughout the tour of the cars, and he's here with his wife, Maureen. Chrysler referred us to Don Perdome, who pointed us to Ronnie Screama, and they took either an outdated race car that you see on the screen, or perhaps a car that they didn't need anymore, and that we used that for the basis for the show car. And we went through 3 different paint schemes to keep up with the developments with Mattel. And of course, the final car in the RTS was the white car that he campaigned against Tom McEwen, who's since passed away recently. All the show cars were designed by Harry Bradley, and some of the neat slides that are up there, you see the sketches that Harry had done in the instructions, and he was a tremendous designer. I first met Harry when he was a member of the Drive-In Deuces in Teaneck, New Jersey. He went to Art Center and actually became a teacher in Art Center in LA. The first Roadrunner was done by Jerry Roman at Roman's Chariots in Cleveland, and the second Roadrunner was done by Chuck Miller in Detroit. Those were all designed by Harry Bradley. The Plymouth Duster was built by Byron Grenfell in Marquette, Michigan, and painted by Butch Brins in Milwaukee. And the 440 CUDA was done in 2 versions by Chuck Miller. Over my 10 years of promotions, I went through various positions. I'm trying to shorten this up. But that was the biggest project that we had ever been involved in and that I personally had ever been involved in. It was all implemented through Bob Larivee's Promotions Incorporated, certainly. Now, when I was putting this whole thing together, I was talking to some guys about the different Chrysler products that they had gone through, what have you. So I put together, I was surprised to find, and I'm embarrassed to say that Plymouth four-door was the car we had in Washington, D.C., followed by that DeSoto Business Coupe and a Plymouth Fury that I actually drag raced. Back in the day, we called it MMBSA. It was Mommy's B-Stock Automatic. So, but anyway, that followed with a Plymouth Satellite, and the yellow Dodge Charger up there I bought in Michigan for something like $2,300. It was a 383 automatic car. It was a family car. And then we repainted it in acrylic and then later in lacquer in the red and black, which was sort of stolen from the Mustangs of that era. And when I went to California to set up shows west of the Rockies for Bob Larivee's Promotions Incorporated in a partnership, I had a 440 Chrysler wagon that you see in that picture. We were doing a publicity shot for the first show that we did in Los Angeles for Thanksgiving. And that 440 Chrysler had a lot of torque and it pulled a lot of heavy trailers. And then the final one is the red PT Cruiser that is actually our family personal car today. We bought it in 2003 and it still runs and it still looks great. So, but anyway, it is a thank you for your time. We're first up and I'm sorry for taking as much time as we have, but it's a true honor to have our names associated with the likes of Don Garlitz and Richard Petty and Don Prudhomme and Keith Black and many more that have joined. Steve Giuliano needs to be honored, and he's going to be honored for gathering as many of these cars as he could. I've got to personally thank a friend that I've made in Scott Lindsay, who made all this happen, and personally, bottom line, Rob Wolf, Collector's Guide, Lisa Leathery, Tim Costello, who put all this together, and the Mopar Collector's Guide for the effort that you guys have put together in doing this, and it's an honor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's our honor. That's just for you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
If you like this video, please smash the like button. And if you want to see more videos like this one online, hit the subscribe to Mopar TV button. It's totally free. Also, if you'd like to support the Mopar Hall of Fame and vote for future inductees, go to MoparCollectorsGuide.com and subscribe to the only Mopar magazine that matters.